Well, let's get into our weekly feature on the big stories of the past week. And of course, we get more on what's to come over the next 7 days. You can also participate in the discussion by telling us which story really stood out for you in the week that was. Share your views with a 30-second WhatsApp video or voice note on the number 072 110 5584 or give us a call on 010-594-6010. Really welcome your contributions. We're joined in studio by Sunday Times editor Makhudu Sefara, social commentator Lorato Tshenkeng, who's in studio with us as well. Good evening, gentlemen. And virtually we're joined by Unisa Professor of Political Sciences, Dirk Kotze, joining us via video link. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. What a week.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Yay.
It's been a very busy week, and I know that if you've been watching the news rundowns, it's really difficult to keep up with some of the stories that we're doing. But before we get into it, the Sunday Times also relaunching a new format.
Yes.
Before we get into some of the big stories,
Yeah, I come bearing great things.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, we've effected some changes. We've reduced the size of the paper a little bit to just make sure that it's manageable and it's easy on the eye, and we've introduced a few features in there. We're using micro elements here and there, graphics there.
Yeah.
Essentially to just make sure that where you're looking at international or titles across the globe with great standing, your New York Times, your Financial Times, your London Sunday Times, and in South Africa, the Sunday Times, there's a symmetry there that's going on in terms of size, in terms of, how other elements are used to tell a story, a dash of color here and there.
Yeah.
But essentially still retaining the journalism that the Sunday Times is known for.
Yeah, and I all the best with the new look and the format moving forward.
Thank you.
The Sunday newspaper is such an incredibly important one because it's a moment for us to reflect on what's happened and also what's to come. Can we start with this? And I'm going to stay with you for the first one here, Makhudu, because one of the big talking points over the past few weeks has been Stillfontein, and the developments just get crazy and crazy. At this point, this week, some of the big discussions, of course, being about, trying to get some sort of professional skills underground to assess what's happening. But talk to us about really standout moments in the coverage of that particular story.
Yeah, I mean, from weeks ago, Stillfontein has been, quite a story to tell, given the drama that unfolded there because of the police operation Valam Godi, and the claims about the number of people who are there, the levels that are there, and the process in terms of which they're getting people out who need to come out, and the process in terms of which to get the food down there, and if you're getting the food there, you're getting it to which level, and so on and so on. And I mean, the thing that I battle with is that where someone says there's 4,000 people plus minus, down there.
That number has gone from 350 to 400, then 4,000. It's
So whose number do you believe? And as people come out and some people say, hey, it's this or the other, given that at some point we said, or the authorities said, you can't take food there, you can't take water there. Are there people who are affected? Are we going to get to a point where we're pulling out bodies? Is that the thing that's coming, or it's not coming? And that the people who are there, it's a gray area. It's very difficult to verify, and so on and so on. So that's the one element about that story, that I find fascinating. Yeah. But the other is this idea by the police where they say, no, we can't send our people down there. It is unsafe. But yet there are people there.
And the community has been going down there.
Exactly. So if it's unsafe, and no one wants the police to send people to their deaths, right? But if the police can't go down there, the question I have is, so whose rules, whose laws apply there? And if there's a crime scene, down there, who's managing
and
that
policing
crime
it,
scene?
yeah.
So, it creates another layer of, grayness that I think we need to wrestle with as a country.
I made the point to someone that, we've got law enforcement above ground, and we've even got some of our official events, for instance. You'll see great works of what we're able to do in the skies, but what happens when we go below the ground? But Prof, I want to bring you in here quickly, because then there's been the issue around the political voices around Stillfontein. Whose voice, Prof, is missing from this discussion? And then, of course, everyone talking about minister and the presidency. We're not going to help them. We're going to smoke them out. You saw the health minister this week also coming out and saying we're not sending ARVs because that needs to be by instruction of a doctor. Whose political voice is missing in this discussion, Prof?
Well, I think some of the voices that are missing are, first of all, the Minister of Mineral Resources, Mr. Gwede Mantashe. This is about mining, and in the past he made some strong statements about artisanal mining versus illegal mining. Now, this is now a test case, I would say, with respect to that. The Minister of Policing, he has been quite prominent in this situation so far. I think what is also missing are the trade unions, because especially those unions involved in the mining sector, because they were also, or in the past, argued that these type of activities must be legalized in some instances. In other instances, they want to protect their own members who are more formalized in terms of employment by mining companies. So I think that those elements are very important that must be added to it. I think what we are seeing now is actually the contradiction between, on the one hand, the notion of this is a criminal affair, that it's about criminal activities, versus on the other hand, it's about human rights. And that is why this, it has been taken to the High Court in Gauteng also, and we're waiting for the final judgment with respect to that. Yeah. So it brings out that while it is many people regard it as a situation which is purely criminal in nature, and therefore that's the caring of the miners down in the mine, providing of food and water and so on, is contradictory, that it is actually aiding them in order to continue with what they are busy with. So I think this shows to us that in this respect, there's a lack of policy in terms of whether it is legal or should become legal, and if it is, how it will be regulated, and what will be the way in which it does relate also to the formalized component of mining, the mining companies, and the interactional relationship between them.
Yeah. Lorato, let me bring you in here, because then there's the social discussion. I remember when Operation Vala Umkoti in Stillfontein was sort of an early discussion, right?
Yep.
A lot of people saying, oh, what an innovative approach by police. And then there was an expectation that the community, by some, that the community would be welcoming the operation. But it was the opposite. The community actually up in arms about how this operation is being executed. I mean, what do we take from that about where we are socially in our communities right now, and how we view the crime that is illegal mining?
So Naledi, and this can be viewed outside of our context and reality, right? And our context and reality is that unemployment is extremely high in South Africa. And what it therefore means is that people, when they cannot find or use formal ways of creating employment for themselves, or even maintaining their livelihoods, they are going to seek other forms. And unfortunately, and again to Prof. Dirk Kotze's point around the lack of, or at least the gap in regulation of artisanal mining, right? You then find that mines leave, all of these mines across the country, non-rehabilitated, or at least partially rehabilitated, not complying completely to Department of Minerals and Energy's regulations, and thus leaving the space. And once people eke out a living out of something, it is going to be very difficult for you to say, stop it, and without replacing it with anything. And that is why in this case, you then find people who are in these mining communities, if you say to them that stop, continuing to mine in these dangerous spaces, their families and livelihoods depend on this. it is a crime. They acknowledge that. And even a number of the people that were commenting around, whether they were speaking in camera, appealing for, officials or people to be sent down there to retrieve, or at least send help. You could tell that they were not saying that, no, this is not a crime. They were acknowledging that we acknowledge that this is a crime. However, the question they ask is, how else should we eke a living? Yeah.
What stood out, I think, for me is I suppose there's this idea about illegal mining so much linked to foreign nationals that are in the country illegally. And what Stillfontein has taught us is that that's not necessarily the case.
Absolutely.
That some of these illegal miners, very much South Africans, very much a part of our communities. But let's move on. There's this discussion around our Spaza shops, Makhudu.
Yes.
On Friday, an 8-year-old in Diepkloof loses their life. Here we go again. Another child losing their life. Earlier on in the week, it was a 5-year-old. We're still bleeding lives. The natural, we've called it a national state of disaster. Is there a fatigue for that story? I mean, because here's the issue. Are we updating it enough? As in, is enough information coming in to say there's a solution?
No, I don't know. You might be right, because the Sowetan did a very beautiful front page thing where they put the pictures of all the kids and said, Mr. President, are you going to do something about this? Or, it's just one child after another. And of course, we had the presidential address weeks later. But the question for many of us is whether the address and the registration and the registration of Spaza shops is going to address the issue that's leading to kids dying.
Losing their lives.
Because these Spaza shops that are the president has ordered should be closed are the ones that are implicated in this. And he was trying to be careful not to say those that are not implicated must be closed too. But the difficulty with that is that you're going to have Spaza shops being added to, to this list as one after another. We have kids one after another dying. So, today it's this 2, next week it's another 2, then you add them. But how's that, from a big picture point of view, helping us to make sure that, the deaths are stopped? Because what we're complaining about is not the tinkering that we're seeing happening. Is there a solution to this? How are we going to, as a country, make sure that we don't lose another child because of this
chemical?
Yeah.
We spoke to the parents of 2 children that had died in Naledi. And one of the things that they said is they still don't know and don't have answers as to where this organophosphate chemical is coming from. And that's possibly something that needs to be looked at, Lorato. But what do you take from this? Are we solving the right problems? Is leadership solving the right problems and equipping people enough? Because then there's the discussion around, well, economically, sure, we can shut down some Spaza shops, but that's part of a big supply chain as well that might have an economic impact.
And sadly, Naledi, with the reactive response from the presidency, which one, albeit late, right? Because there were, we always say, one death, one too many, right? And of course, when they were seeing that the numbers were rising, then there was an address. But I think one of the key elements or questions we must also be asking is, knowing that there's some sort of a knee-jerk reaction, what is it going to do to those who are survivalists and now they're struggling to comply, right? So when the solution becomes the problem, right? So you're trying to solve the one problem, which is around ensuring that there's compliance around health and safety, around food and all of that. What does it do to this informal economy? In fact, interestingly, today or so, there was a video of former late Minister Tito Mboweni as far back as 2001 talking about the regulation of Spaza shops, right? And the question is, so if one of the leaders that, when they were in Zanin hailing him as this, one of the greatest leaders, 3 years later, nothing has been done about it, and we now have this kind of knee-jerk reaction. The question is, are we actually going to be seeing some sustainable way of creating solutions around this?
Yeah.
I am not hopeful. I think that we are going to see Makhudu and all the other editors around the country keeping, yourselves registering all of these deaths of young children, because we don't have, unfortunately, a systemic approach to solving some of these problems.
It's not something we want to keep doing.
I think there's two areas. Oh, sure. There's
Go ahead.
two areas where we're failing with this. The first is the inspectors.
Yeah.
So where you come up with a set of regulations and say that this is what must happen, you need to have the people on the ground who are going to these Spaza shops and making sure that food is packaged the way food is supposed to be packaged, stored, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's a problem. Number two, this issue that we're revisiting about registration, if you go back to the laws and regulations that we have in the country, these Spaza shops should not be operating in the first place. So if the laws that we have currently were being applied, we wouldn't be having this problem that has caused us so much pain.
That's the laws as they stand.
As they are, yes.
They stand. Very interesting. Prof, I'm going to bring you in. The political implications of this. You've already got, political parties like the ATM that are, also adding their voices, and many political parties getting on the bandwagon. ATM saying, close the Spaza shops. What do you think the political implications of this issue is? Let's not forget, 2026 is coming up, the local government elections, and communities are seeing this on a daily basis in their communities.
Yes, I think there's going to be a widespread type of political consequences, of political implications for this, and it might differ from area to area. What is a key issue here is the association with foreigners who are owning many of these Spaza shops, and it is therefore, especially that registration is making it now very difficult for them in order to be able to register. So that's the one component. So it's South Africans versus foreigners. It's about the economic activities and to what extent that is possible to be exercised or to be done, especially very often in more informal areas, but also in the more formal areas they are there. I think it's also a reflection on local authorities, because bylaws with respect to health regulations are in the first instance the responsibility of the metros and other local authorities. And I think this is an area where they are not efficient. We know local authorities in general don't necessarily comply or exercise their responsibilities with respect to this. I think what is also important is that, and this takes us a little bit wider, and we've seen now these raids on some of the warehouses, especially in Durban, but other areas also, is about the control over the importation as well, and acquiring of goods even from outside South Africa. And that there is a widespread, I would say, cooperation amongst different businesses, maybe one can say illegal businesses, in order to coordinate this. So it's not only about the Spaza shop owners, it's a wider network that it appears to me that's actually involved in it. And what it does say is that the control, for example, by customs, by the importation of these goods are not good enough. There's not enough inspections that are taking place, regulations that make it very difficult for these type of products to be imported. Yeah. And it's not only about food, it's also about clothing and others. So I think it's a wake-up call, and hopefully the government at the different levels, national, provincial and local, will come together in order to deal with this matter. It's not something which can only be done by the national government.
Yeah. Let me do this, Prof. I'm going to stay with you because I wanted to shift gear a little bit and talk politics. This week we saw the MK party celebrating their 1-year anniversary, and then, of course, the EFF, as it prepares itself for its conference next month, losing one of its founding members in Alfred Modzi. And then, of course, who can forget the story around former President Jacob Zuma's sustained expulsion from the African National Congress, and him saying that, well, we're going to consult and see what we can do about this. I mean, what you make of just where these shifts are really moving to in the political landscape, and what is looking like a growing and bulging MK party?
Yes, I think for MK, this is all the way good news. You know, each time one of the, especially EFF members, move over to MK, it's in the news. It's airtime. It is a public exposure. They don't have to pay for it. It is one of the best times for MK in order to put them all the time in the public space, and to present themselves as a party that is growing, that's on the move, that there's activities within it, it's expanding, and it's attractive to more people. However, one has to be careful that what we see on the surface, especially with respect to personalities who are moving from one party to like the EFF to MK, that it does not necessarily translate into that there is also the same type of movement from supporters of the EFF towards that of MK. If we look, for example, at some two sets of opinion polls that have been conducted in September, so it's some time back now, it shows that MK support has actually been reduced and not increased. So it's the election of 2026, the local government election, is going to be a major test for MK.
Yeah.
And the main reason for that is that it's going to be about what is their support at local level. And what we've seen with this election is that they have concentration of support in 3 provinces out of the 9.
Yeah.
In KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, and Gauteng. The other 6 provinces, they have very little support, less than 2%. So for them to become a major force on the political landscape, they will have to expand their support to these other provinces also. And that's going to be the main challenge, because at this stage, it looks like MK is very good in terms of functioning at the level of national leaders, national figures. But what happens on the ground in terms of the party organization that must be established for elections like this?
Of course, Floyd Chivambo, the SG of the MK party, they're talking about strengthening some of those, elements at the ground level for the party. But Lorato, talk to me about this. Prof is talking about how all of these stories are free exposure. And I know that as an editor, you're looking at that about we have to, once again, we keep looking at the MK party. Yeah. But Lorato, when they do that, the country is actually interested, right? With all these moves, Alfred Modzi leaves the EFF. I imagine, now the question becomes, where is he going? Yeah. People almost feeling like they can guess exactly where that's going to go.
No, absolutely. So in politics, Naledi, there's ordinarily people who talk about an air war and a ground war, right? And the ground war talks to the actual mobilization of members or membership or people that you want to be actual supporters, right? And the MK seems to be doing that relatively well. They are present in spaces. And of course, to Prof. Dirk Kotze, around in the 3 provinces where they are prominently at least visible. That is one of the things that is going to help them, in the sense that even if you look at the concentration of media itself, what is the point of being, too visible in the Northern Cape where there's only the SABC and Diamond Field Advertiser, right? So you want to be that visible in provinces where you know that, one, when there's activity, the likelihood of a camera following Floyd Chivambo or any of the prominent members is going to give you that. Yeah. And what that does on the converse is that, look at the story, the negative story they have around their chief whip in Mpumalanga, who has literally just said to Jacob Zuma, you can go and jump off a cliff, right? And when you look at it, it has almost, they've literally just managed to make it a by the way story. But that's that's a leader defying the chief leader and
The Godfather.
the Godfather, right? So their ability to create this kind of publicity enables them, and whether it's negative or not, whether you have Mzwanele Manyi utilizing also his position as the spokesperson of the Jacob Zuma Foundation to amplify that, because there are those elements as well. So they are literally saying it does not only have to be about party positions and political issues. It's also about other related things that can give us and prop the party up.
Okay, do you want to step in here? Because I imagine that as an editor, there's a sense of there's some stories that you just can't ignore, like role players like the MK party that you just can't ignore.
No, you can't. In fact, in the Sunday Times today, our political editor went to speak to Mr. Zuma himself. It's a very interesting interview. The things that he says in there, but I do agree with the point that you make, that a perception of progress does not, in and of itself, constitute progress. So there's the make-believe stuff that they do, but the real test is not too far. Local government elections are around the corner. So there we are going to see whether or not MK Party has been able to consolidate support from the support that they had in the last elections, and whether or not what is being said, for example, about a party like the EFF, that, things are falling apart, that are things indeed falling apart, or that some of the people who are leaving the EFF are, simply high-profile people who are not, supported by
the base.
The base that Lorato was talking about.
That's going to be interesting. And I suppose, like Prophet said, the proof will be in the pudding in 2026, right? We're taking your WhatsApps on 072-110-5584. We've got a WhatsApp that's come in from Stratford Extension 5 in Orange Farm that says, "Hi Naledi, please ask Eskom people, what do they say about us who don't have electricity for 2 years now? Our transformer blast and we paid the 500 they asked. We can't recode something that we don't have." Okay, Lorato, I want to give this to you, because here's the frustration.
Sure.
We saw people queuing up in the thousands in various parts of the country, one elderly man even dying in the queue to try and get their meter updated. And then there's the people that say, well, we still don't have the infrastructure that we need, our lights aren't on. Was this recoding, in your view, Lorato, communicated effectively?
Sadly, Eskom did a typical tick box exercise, right? If you go as far back as July, they did communicate. So if you track and trace it up to now, you'll recognize that there have been some communication. But considering how it was, or how many people this was going to affect, the effort should have been a lot bigger. And Naledi, the advantage we have is that we have a case study in COVID comms, right? During COVID comms times, right, you literally had an understanding that you need to get to the message to as many people using a variety of formats, digital, radio, you must also utilize language translations. One of the simplest tests that I just did was to look at how much of translation was done. And sadly, the communication was not even translated into different languages, right? So you can then just tell that it was a matter of, listen, we're expecting our communities to know that there will be a cut-off period, and they should comply. But the question for me is not even just about Eskom. It's now about a GCIS that does not have a permanent CEO. And back to the 2020, COVID crisis time, you saw a lot more coordination of communications. And for me, it's the gap is now, you can then see it that if you know that this thing is going to affect as many people as we're now seeing that it is, even a person is dying standing in a queue, it shows that the minister in the presidency and the leadership of GCIS and the entire leadership of Eskom in terms of communicating this matter, lack of coordination and they really deserve a 0 on this, and you know,
Yeah.
to some extent, culpability for that person who passed away.
You know, I already start to think about even what we're saying about the re-registering of Spaza shops, for instance, and saying people must adhere to, you know, food regulations, but how accessible is the information on the regulations? But I want to wrap it up. Makhudu, what are you watching moving forward? We know that the Concord matter, big story for the week. The crime stats as well, big stories for you in the week coming.
Yeah, crime statistics coming up, but we're also still watching, you know, developments from Lusikisiki. There's this guy who calls himself a monster, who's arrested, and there's stuff that's coming up about how this whole thing is planned, number of people involved, etc., etc. You know, it's amazing stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and there it is. A killer serving a life term for murder of cop was up for parole until he was allegedly linked to the massacre of 18 people. My goodness.
Yeah, and the thing that's also interesting about this is that he was due to be released on parole, you know, a week or two, when, according to these recordings, he planned the Lusikisiki massacre from within his prison cell.
Sure.
So you sit here and you're thinking, we are safe, we are out here. Someone who's in prison is upset about what's happening in their village or wherever, and they're saying, you know, just watch what will happen.
While someone is in prison.
In prison.
Gosh, yeah. So that's really something to watch out for. Thank you so much, Makhudu, an absolute pleasure. Professor Dirk Kotze, always appreciate your time. I look forward to chatting some more in the future. And Lorato Tshenkeng, of course, social commentator. Great to having you guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. Of course, Makhudu Sefara is the editor of the Sunday Times with their new format, that paper launching today with the brand new format. All right, let's take a short break. More news on the other side of this.